The day I lost my daughter, I was wearing a seatbelt. That's the detail I kept coming back to in the weeks that followed, not the sound of the impact, not the way the airbag burned my forearms, not even the image of the paramedic's face when he looked at my stomach and then quickly looked away. Just the seatbelt. I was doing everything right. I was 5 months along. We had already picked a name. We had already bought the crib. It was a Tuesday evening in early November, and I was driving home from a client dinner, 1 glass of sparkling water, no alcohol, home by 9 the way I always was. The man who ran the red light was texting. The police report confirmed it. He hit the passenger side of my car at 43 miles per hour, and by the time the ambulance reached the hospital, there was nothing left to save. My husband arrived at the emergency room 40 minutes after I did. I remember thinking he looked more inconvenienced than frightened. He stood at the foot of my bed with his arms crossed and his jaw tight, and the first full sentence he said to me after the nurse had already explained what happened, after I had already been told, was, "Were you on your phone?" I wasn't. But that question was the beginning of everything. My mother-in-law arrived an hour later. She didn't hold my hand. She stood beside my husband near the door and whispered something to him that I couldn't hear, and whatever it was, his expression didn't soften. It hardened. I lay there with monitors still attached to my arms, still wearing a hospital gown that didn't close properly in the back, and I watched the two of them have a conversation in the corner of my room as if I weren't there. I was discharged the next afternoon with printed instructions about physical recovery, a referral for a follow-up appointment, and a prescription for the pain. My husband drove me home. We didn't speak for most of the ride. When we pulled into the driveway, he turned off the engine and sat for a moment before saying, "Your sister warned me you were always distracted when you drove." My sister had said no such thing. I knew that immediately and absolutely. But I was in pain, and I was exhausted, and I had lost my daughter 12 hours ago, so I didn't argue. I just opened the door and walked into the house. The nursery was down the hall from our bedroom. The door was open. I had painted it myself in early September, a soft sage green, and the crib was still assembled in the corner with a white mobile hanging above it that I had ordered from a small shop in Vermont. My mother-in-law had offered to help decorate, and I had politely declined, which she had not forgotten. I stood in the doorway of that room for a long time that first night home. I don't know how long. Eventually, I heard my husband's voice from downstairs saying dinner was getting cold, and I closed the door and went down. The weeks that followed had a specific texture that I still have trouble describing. My husband was not violent in those first weeks. He was something that felt, in some ways, worse. He was absent. He slept in the guest room, citing that I needed space to recover. He worked late most nights. When he was home, he was on his phone, and when I tried to talk to him, really talk to him about the loss, about what I was feeling, he would look at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before our marriage. Like I was a problem he had already solved and didn't want to revisit. His mother came over twice a week. She brought food, which sounded kind, and she asked questions about my recovery, which also sounded kind, but somewhere underneath the food and the questions was something else entirely. She started referring to the accident as the incident. She would say things like, "After the incident, you need to really focus on taking care of yourself," with a slight emphasis on the word yourself, as if my failure to do so was what had caused the incident in the first place. One afternoon, about 3 weeks after I came home, I overheard her in the kitchen with my husband. I was coming down the stairs and they hadn't heard me. She was saying that I had always been too focused on my business, that I drove too fast, that maybe this was my body telling me something. My husband said quietly but clearly, "I've been thinking the same thing." I sat on the bottom step for a while after they went quiet. Then I went back upstairs. I want to be clear about something, because clarity matters here. I did not drive too fast. I was not distracted. The other driver ran a red light while looking at his phone, and a traffic camera confirmed it. He was cited and later sued. None of that seemed to factor into the story my husband and his mother had already decided to believe. My physical recovery was textbook, according to my OB. My emotional recovery was not. I had stopped sleeping through the night by week 2. By week 4, I was waking up at 3 in the morning and sitting in the kitchen until sunrise because the silence of our bedroom had become unbearable. I made appointments with a grief counselor, a woman whose office was near my business downtown, and I went twice a week, and I did not tell my husband for 2 weeks because I already knew how he would frame it. When he found out, he came to find me in the kitchen one Saturday morning and stood in the doorway with his coffee. "Therapy," he said, not as a question. "Your mother thinks you're using it to avoid dealing with what actually happened." I asked him what he thought had actually happened. He said, "You were distracted. You've always done too much. Something had to give eventually." That was the first time I cried in front of him since coming home. He watched me cry. He didn't cross the room. He finished his coffee and put the mug in the sink and left the kitchen. The night everything broke happened 6 weeks after the accident. It was a Saturday. My husband had been out with his business partner and came home late smelling like a bar, which wasn't new, and he found me in the nursery. I had gone in there for the first time since that first night home. I was just sitting in the glider in the corner, not doing anything in particular, just sitting in the room where my daughter was supposed to be. He appeared in the doorway and looked at me and said, "What are you doing in here?" I said I didn't know. I said I just needed to sit somewhere that felt like her. He said that was the most selfish thing he had ever heard. He said I had destroyed this family, that I had been careless with something that mattered more than my career or my schedule or whatever else I had been prioritizing. He was loud and he was close. And when I stood up from the glider and tried to move past him toward the door, he grabbed my arm. What happened in the next few minutes is something I have gone over many times in therapy. The details are clear to me, but I'll keep them brief because I don't need to linger there. He shoved me. I hit the corner of the dresser. I went down. He didn't stop. His mother, who I had not known was in the house, who had apparently let herself in while he was out, which she had done before, appeared in the doorway, and she did not call for help. She watched. When it was over, I was on the floor of the nursery with a split lip and 2 cracked ribs, confirmed later. My husband walked out of the room. His mother followed him. I called 911 from the floor. That is not a small detail. I want to say it plainly. I called the police. I know that victims of domestic violence often don't, and I understand every reason why. I had my own reasons screaming at me in that moment, reasons about my marriage and my reputation and what people would think, but I called anyway. I called because I was on the floor of the room I had painted for my daughter, and something in me that was still functioning clearly said, "This is the line." 2 officers responded. They arrested my husband and documented the scene, which included blood on the dresser and a crack in the baseboard where I had hit it. His mother was questioned at length and eventually charged as well, though her charge was lesser. My husband was charged with domestic assault. He spent the night in jail. He was released the following morning on bail. I did not go back to that house. My sister came and picked me up from the hospital where I had been taken for my ribs, and I went home with her, and I did not return except once with a police escort and my sister beside me to collect my essential belongings. My husband stood in the driveway and watched us load the car and did not speak. My sister's spare room became my whole world for the next several weeks. She had a small house on the east side of town with a yard that got good morning light, and she let me stay as long as I needed without making it feel like charity. She fed me, and she drove me to my grief counseling appointments when I didn't feel safe to drive myself, and she watched television with me at night when the dark was too quiet. She was the reason I got through that winter. The legal process was slow and, at times, humiliating. There are parts of navigating a criminal complaint against your own husband that nobody prepares you for: the documentation they want, the questions that feel like accusations, the defense attorney suggesting in a preliminary hearing that my injuries were consistent with a fall. My attorney was sharper and her documentation was better. And she had the 911 call, and she had his mother's statement, which contradicted itself in 3 places. I won't say the outcome was everything I wanted, because the outcome never is. He pled to a lesser charge in exchange for probation, mandatory counseling, and the terms of the divorce settlement my attorney had negotiated. It wasn't a prison sentence, but it was a record. And the divorce was final 4 months later. I want to tell you that healing is linear. It isn't. There were weeks in that spring where I thought I was doing well, eating again, sleeping again, going back to the office and sitting at my desk and feeling something recognizable as normal, and then there were days that arrived without warning where I could not get off the couch. My grief counselor said this was expected. She said the body holds everything it wasn't allowed to process in real time, and the couch days were just the backlog catching up. I went back to work gradually. My business, a small event planning company I had built over 7 years, had slowed during my absence, and some clients had gone elsewhere, which I had expected. But my assistant had kept things running with a competence that made me want to cry with gratitude, And by late spring I was taking on new clients again and finding that work, structured and purposeful work, was one of the few things that made me feel like myself. I started sleeping through the night again in early summer. I remember the morning I woke up and realized I had slept 8 hours straight, and I just lay there for a while feeling it. Something had shifted. I made one friend during that period who I hadn't expected. My sister's neighbor, a woman about 10 years older than me who had raised 3 kids on her own and had the specific calm of someone who has survived things, began stopping by on Saturday mornings. She would bring coffee and sit on my sister's front step with me and we would talk, or sometimes not talk, and she never asked me to explain anything. She just showed up. I didn't realize until much later how much that mattered. It was through her that I met the man I'll call my partner now, because that's what he became, though it took a long time to get there. He was her younger brother, visiting for a weekend in August, and the 3 of us ended up on the front step on a Saturday morning, and he was easy to talk to in a way I hadn't expected from anyone. He asked about my business and genuinely listened to the answer. He didn't push. He didn't pry. When he went back home that Sunday, he sent his sister a message asking if it would be appropriate to reach out to me, which she told me about before he did, which I thought was the most considerate thing I had heard in a long time. We talked on the phone for 3 months before we saw each other again. I was honest with him about what had happened, not all at once. Not in a way that felt like unburdening, but gradually, in the way that you tell someone the truth when you've decided to trust them. He listened. He didn't tell me how I should feel. He didn't rush anything. By the time we started spending real time together, the first year after the accident had passed, I had moved out of my sister's house and into a small apartment of my own, second floor, good light, a fire escape where I had set up 2 chairs and a small table and where I drank my coffee on weekend mornings. I had regrown my client list. I had completed what my counselor and I had agreed was the primary phase of my grief work, which didn't mean I was done but meant I had developed the tools. I had started running again, which I hadn't done since before the pregnancy, and the physical reality of my own body doing what I asked it to do was something I hadn't realized I needed. I was, in the specific and honest sense of the word, okay. Not untouched, not the same as before, but okay. Some mornings I was better than okay. The day I saw my ex-husband again was a Thursday afternoon in February, 16 months after the accident. I was picking up an order from a print shop downtown, materials for a corporate event I was coordinating, and he was standing at the counter when I walked in. I saw him before he saw me. I had a moment, a genuine, physical moment where every part of me registered the situation and I made a choice. I did not leave. I took a breath and I walked to the counter, and I waited. He turned and saw me. I watched his face do several things in quick succession: recognition, then something I could only describe as calculation, then this was the part I hadn't expected, something that looked like grief. He looked bad. I say this not out of satisfaction, though I won't pretend there wasn't a complicated feeling there. He had lost weight in the wrong way, the kind that looks like stress rather than intention. He had circles under his eyes. His jacket was wrinkled. He looked like someone who hadn't been sleeping well for a long time. He said my name. I said hello. He asked how I was, and I told him honestly that I was well. I said it without performance, without trying to make him feel anything, just as information. I was well. He looked at me, at my coat, which was new, at the event materials I was holding, at whatever my face was doing, and something seemed to pass through him. He said he had tried to call me. I told him I had changed my number. He said he knew. He said his mother had tried too. I said I knew that as well. There was a pause, and then he said, I've been seeing someone. A counselor, court-ordered at first, but I kept going after. I said that was good. I meant it, in the way that you mean something true without it changing anything. He said he was sorry. He said it in the particular way of someone who has rehearsed the words many times and is finally using them, which was different from it being meaningless, but also different from it being enough. I told him I appreciated that. I told him that the work he was doing on himself was important and that I hoped he continued it. Then my order was ready, and I picked it up, and I said I had to get back. He said, "You look like you're doing really well." I said, "I am." I walked out into the cold afternoon air and I stood for a moment on the sidewalk with my box of printed materials, and I took one long breath. Then I got in my car, checked my mirrors, and pulled out of the parking lot. My partner was at my apartment when I got home. He had a key, had had one for the past 4 months, and he was making dinner when I came in, something with garlic and lemon that I could smell from the hallway. I set the box down by the door and stood in the kitchen doorway watching him for a moment before he noticed me. He looked up and said, "How'd the pickup go?" I said, "It was interesting, actually." He raised an eyebrow. And I sat down at the kitchen counter. And I told him about walking into the print shop, about my ex-husband's face, about the short, strange conversation and what it had felt like. He listened without interrupting. When I was done, he was quiet for a moment, then said, "How are you feeling about it?" Not how did you feel seeing him. Not what did he say exactly. How are you feeling about it? Present tense, now, in this kitchen, with the garlic and the lemon and the February dark outside. I thought about it for a real moment before I answered. I said, "Okay. I actually feel okay." He nodded and turned back to the stove. I sat there in the warmth of my own kitchen, my apartment, my lease, my fire escape with its 2 chairs, and I thought about everything the word okay was holding right now, how much more it weighed than it used to. It wasn't the absence of grief. My daughter was still gone. The accident had still happened. The nursery with the sage green walls and the white mobile still existed somewhere, either repainted now or not. And somewhere inside me there was a room I would carry for the rest of my life. But I was here. I was building something. I had called 911 from the floor of a room where I had no business being on the floor. And I had gotten up, and I had kept going, and I was here. My counselor and I had talked in one of our sessions last fall about what it means to survive something you didn't choose. She said something I have thought about many times since. She said that strength isn't the absence of being hurt, it's what you do with the hurt once it's yours. You can carry it like a wound that never closes, or you can carry it like a scar that proves you healed. I thought about my ex-husband's wrinkled jacket and the circles under his eyes. I thought about his mother's whispers in the corner of my hospital room. I thought about the nursery, and the green paint, and the mobile I had chosen from a small shop in Vermont. Then I thought about my partner at the stove, and my assistant who had kept the business running, and my sister's front step in the morning light, and 8 hours of sleep in a row, and the fire escape with 2 chairs. I stood up and walked over to the stove. My partner handed me a spoon without being asked, and I tasted the sauce, and I told him it needed more salt, and he laughed, and we stood there together in the small warm kitchen on a Thursday night in February while the city went on outside the windows. I was 35 years old, and I had survived a year that had tried to take everything from me, and I had not let it, not completely. Not in the ways that mattered most. The sauce needed more salt. I added it myself. We ate dinner at the table by the window, and afterward we washed the dishes together and left them to dry, and I slept through the night. I just told you the truth of what happened to me, and I want to be honest about why, because somewhere out there someone is sitting on the floor of a room they shouldn't be on the floor of, and they're trying to decide whether to make the call. Make the call. Whatever comes after it is hard, I won't pretend otherwise. The legal process is exhausting and the healing is not linear, and there will be couch days you didn't plan for. But you get up. You find the people who bring coffee and sit with you without needing you to explain. You find the work that makes you feel like yourself again. You find, eventually, the kitchen that smells like garlic and lemon and is yours. You get to be okay. Not the same, you never go back to the same. But okay in a way that is deeper and truer than the okay you were before. Because this one you built yourself, from the floor up, with full knowledge of what it cost. If any part of this is your story, if you have ever been blamed for your own grief, if you have ever been made to feel like your pain was your fault, leave a comment below. You don't have to say much. Sometimes just saying "I hear this" is enough. And if you're ready to share what you survived, I want to hear that too. Don't forget to like this video if it spoke to you. It helps more people find it who might need it. And I'll see you next time.